What is up guys, it's Aaron from Rudy Visuals, and in today's video we are reviewing the Viltrox 56mm f1.4 lens for Canon EFM right after that intro. So you may remember a few weeks back we reviewed the Viltrox 23mm f1.4, which we actually really liked. Well, now Viltrox have sent over this, which is their 56mm lens for mirrorless crop sensor Canon cameras. So taking into account the 1.6 crop, you're left with an effective focal length of about 90mm, which is right around that ideal focal length of 85mm for portraits. And like the 23mm lens we reviewed, there are also versions of this lens for Sony crop sensor mirrorless cameras and Fujifilm X mount as well. So naturally, as portrait photographers, we were very interested to get our hands on this lens to see what it could do. So a big thank you to Viltrox for sending us this lens, but as always, this will be a fully independent review. This isn't going to be like a super scientific review or anything like that, but purely based on our actual real world usage of using the lens. Okay, so let's go over some specs real quick. So it's a prime lens, 56mm, but with that 1.6 crop, it's more like a 90mm focal length. The max aperture is a very tasty f1.4. It's also a fully auto-focusing lens, and it actually supports IAF, which is very good. This version is the EFM mount, so it pairs very well with, for example, the M50, M6 Mark II, and other crop sensor mirrorless Canon cameras. In this case, we're using it with our little M50. Total weight is about 290 grams, so a very nice lightweight package. And the total price, you can find this on Amazon for about £290. Okay, so let's start with the actual build quality of the lens first of all. So we have an all metal body construction. I believe it's brass metal. And it actually feels really nice and sturdy. It has a nice kind of like mechanical feel to it. The focus and aperture rings turn very nice and smoothly. There's no tactile feedback or like a click as you go through the aperture. Design-wise, the actual lens, to me, it visually looks quite good. The glass is also very pretty, which always helps. And that silver color scheme, it's not gonna be to everyone's taste, but I personally do like it. I think some people have complained about these silver lenses not looking great with the black finish on the M50, but it looks really nice on, for example, the M6 Mark II. When you actually compare the build quality of these Viltrox lenses to Canon's own native lenses, which are pretty terrible build quality wise, you do realize actually how quite nicely made these Viltrox lenses are. I don't believe this is weather sealed or anything like that, but which is understandable for the price, but I'm pretty sure you could probably take this out in very light rain. I also love the included metal mount, which you can hear, that's very sturdy, very strong. And as with the 23mm lens that we reviewed, the 56 also has a little USB in the lens mount, which is used for updating the firmware, which is a really nice place to put it actually. So let's move to the most important aspect, of course, which is the image quality and performance. Now, unfortunately, we are still in the midst of our third lockdown here in London, so we can't actually arrange shoots with models or anything like that. But we did go on a little walk and took a few photo samples and videos, as well as a little jump rope workout that I did the other day. So let's take a quick peek at the results. think of the photos and video footage, be sure to let us know down below. Now, I for one was actually very surprised at how good the images and footage looked. So there are one or two issues that we'll go into, but in terms of the overall sharpness and contrast, even wide open at f1.4, you can get very, very usable photos and footage. With that long focal length coupled with the wide aperture, you can actually easily create very nice shallow depth of field and bokeh, making it a great lens for portrait and for things like B-roll video, for details and up close shots. Personally, I found the sweet spot to be more around a kind of f2.8, f4. Of course, with that f1.4 aperture, you're also able to let in so much light, which makes the lens very usable in low light shooting as well. I think the f1.4 is really the kind of unique selling point, the thing that really makes you want to buy this lens. Now, one of the great features of the Viltrox 56mm lens is that it actually supports IAF, so that if your camera supports it like the M50 does, it makes shooting portraits and getting people and eyes in focus as easy as it can get. So you can worry more about getting the models posing perfectly right, the framing, all that kind of stuff, rather than trying to faff about with like single point AF and trying to get that eye in focus. So this is a really, really useful feature if you're a beginner portrait shooter. And speaking of focusing, again, I was very pleasantly surprised with this lens, as typically like budget 85mm lenses can be a little slow and also quite noisy to focus, which is certainly not the case here. So as you can see here, paired with the Canon's dual pixel AF, the auto focusing performance is accurate and near silent. For portraits and slow moving subjects, it worked great on our M50. The only time we really had problems with focusing was when we tried filming fast moving subjects. For example, here when I was jumping rope, it was a little bit slower and sometimes did hunt. But again, it's not really designed for this sort of work. Now, in terms of issues with the lens, I would say that the biggest problem here is the quite awful chromatic aberrations and color fringing that you get on these high contrast edges, as you can see here. Now, this is quite a common issue with a lot of 85mm like full frame lenses we've used, as well as like something like a nifty 50, but it is quite noticeably bad on this lens. Now, do keep in mind that this can all be fixed to a degree in post, but straight out of the camera, it is really quite jarring how noticeable it is. I'd say most people buying this type of lens probably have no issues, just firing up Lightroom and correcting this, but it's definitely worth mentioning for anyone interested in picking up this lens. Also, being a prime lens and having that effective focal length of 90mm also makes it not the most versatile lens in the world. So while it's great for portraits, for B-roll, street photography, you're not going to be using this lens for, say, vlogging or anything where you might need a wider focal length. The lack of IS as well makes it better when you're using it on a gimbal for best results when shooting video. Now, as portrait photographers primarily, as I said earlier, we've used a number of 85mm prime lenses for full frame, and also we've used a lot of 50mm lenses on crop sensor cameras as well, which gives you a very similar focal length. And quite honestly, I'd say the Viltrox lens actually holds up fairly well to some of those budget-orientated lenses. And if you keep in mind that there aren't really a whole lot of EFM lenses that have this focal length paired with that f1.4 aperture, which remember is usually a very high-end premium feature. So to have that option for the M50 at this price point, it's actually very appealing, and add to that the autofocus, the IAF compatibility, kind of makes this a very compelling option for M50 and other EFM camera users. So taking that into account, it's kind of hard not to recommend this lens. For a portrait shooter, it kind of ticks all the boxes really, but at a very competitive and nicely packaged into this small, attractive, compact lens. It's really down to you whether the color fringing issue is a deal breaker or not. For us, it's definitely not a big issue, as a few tweaks in Lightroom pretty much fixes most of this, as well as just bumping up the aperture a bit. The 56mm lens also complements the 23mm lens that we reviewed very well in my opinion, which is another really great, surprisingly great lens from their EFM lineup. So Viltrox has kind of been killing it recently with their lenses, so definitely worth checking these out. They also have these lenses available for Fujifilm and crop sensor Sony mirrorless cameras as well. So definitely worth checking out if you're not wanting to spend too much money and you want to kind of just experiment with some different focal lengths at very, very cool apertures. And we should also mention that they are going to be releasing similar lenses. I think they're going to be f1.8 lenses for full frame Sony E-mount in the not too distant future. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out any of those reviews. Anyway, that's pretty much the end of this video. Hopefully you guys found it useful. all. Let us know if you have any questions in the comment section down below. And don't forget to follow us on Insta and Facebook. Come say hello to us. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I guess I'll see you on the next video. Hit that thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you loved it. And see you on the next one. Stay safe, guys. Peace.